Now, recently, in a video, Barbarossa mentioned a snippet of a chapter from Estavila's book, The Manipulated Man. And she actually has an entire chapter entitled, roughly in English, The Desire for Unfreedom. And this video is spontaneous, but it's something I've been thinking about quite some time, and thinking about in great depth. And I actually think it's a misnomer, as she puts it, to describe this phenomenon you find amongst the human male population as a desire for unfreedom. I don't think it's a desire for unfreedom, although it tends to take on those dimensions. It seems that way. It's something a bit more complex than simply a desire for unfreedom. So in this video, I'm going to be exploring out loud, as my off-the-cuff videos tend to be. It's basically a thought experiment. Now, the question is, why does it appear to be a desire for unfreedom? Because, well, in many cases, the man shackles himself down to a particular female and subordinates his own desires and his will to hers. And yet, even within such constructs of shackled, wedded bliss or the like, you still see the desire on the part of the male, oftentimes, at least very often, to pursue hobbies, to engage in activities that he enjoys, take advantage of the little free time he may have or may not have. That desire is still there. It's innate. It's quite innate, I think. So then you could say, well, so there is a desire for freedom, but this desire for unfreedom is greater. But I don't really want to look at it in those terms. I actually don't like the terminology she uses, the desire for unfreedom. I don't think it's a desire for unfreedom. I think it stems from something far more complex and something that requires elaborate discussion and explanation. Well, let me ask you something. This is a rhetorical question, obviously, to my audience. The question I get most often from those who know me, who know my position, male or female, and it's probably the question you get, is aren't you afraid of being alone, getting old, being alone, so on and so forth? I mean, this is the most commonplace question by far. I can't think of any other question I receive from others more often with regards to this issue. And the short answer is no, and I'll explain why a bit later. So you see, very simply put, and I'm going to be explaining right now what that actually entails, that loneliness. The desire for unfreedom is quite simply a desire to avert a feeling of loneliness. Now, this has multifactorial causes in the human male, but there's a more general cause for loneliness. It's an interesting topic in and of itself. So first you have to understand whence cometh loneliness. Loneliness is a feeling that we all have on occasion, some more often than others. But in order to have loneliness, you need to be a complex organism with a complex state of conscious awareness. And conscious awareness only comes about through having a complex brain. Now, there are other species, it's been documented, several other species, particularly our fellow primates, but also dolphins, orcas, basically animals with relatively speaking large brains compared to others that also suffer from what appears to be, at the very least, some kind of loneliness. And so it's simply a degree of conscious awareness. The difference between humans and most animals, I think the jury is out on whether cetaceans of the dolphin variety, at least, and other great apes are consciously aware of death or not. But let's limit ourselves for the time being to humans. That awareness of our forthcoming annihilation, and the awareness, whether we acknowledge it or not openly, of the vastness of the cosmos and our relative or absolute smallness compared to that, despite being part of it. I mean, we are, at the end of the day, stardust, as people like to say. That seems more than anything else to be a primary contributing factor to loneliness. It is a conscious awareness of what we are as living organisms in an unfeeling and uncaring universe. Many people choose not to acknowledge the existence of the indifferent universe, and by that I don't mean that they claim it doesn't exist, but they will give the indifferent universe, as I like to call it, a paint job, essentially, a metaphorical paint job. They'll attribute intention to it. They'll attribute all kinds of things and attributes to the universe that simply aren't there. The universe, the plane of existence in which we dwell, is quite simply neither good nor evil, neither bad nor good. It simply is what it is. It's just an unfeeling, unthinking thing. And it is piteously indifferent to our existence because it has no consciousness. Obviously, we do have consciousness. We have a sense of awareness, conscious awareness, far, far greater than the vast majority of animals, and greater than our fellow primates, and probably greater than advanced dolphin cetaceans. And that seems to be the source. Now, the actual source, the depths of any feeling, since feelings all arise ultimately from the brain, the depth of any feeling has to correlate to the relative size, but more so to the complexity of the brain of an organism. So hence why humans feel loneliness more profoundly than other animals. And we're the only species, likely, that is aware of its forthcoming annihilation. But it gets even more complicated than that. That's, of course, the key element. I mean, the ultimate cause, if you will. But there's another problem with conscious awareness, and another problem with being a living organism with a deep sense of conscious awareness. The problem is, and this is something I recognized a long time ago, which is why I've never really grappled with these issues of loneliness, even before going my own way, is that the conscious content of your brain, of your thoughts, of your mind, if you will, and I have no problem using the mind as a metaphor for something. The brain is the mind, and vice versa. The conscious content of your mind cannot, at least with pinpoint accuracy, and often very inaccurately, cannot be related to your fellow human primates. This is why there's miscommunication. Now, I've been a student of language, and language, believe it or not, is as useful as it is and essential. And I'm in the process of making a video where I'll be talking about these issues. Language is essential in communicating to others our desires and wishes, i.e. the content of our minds, yet it is so imprecise. The fact that there are constant miscommunications between people, the fact that when I make a video, there's usually a slew of people not understanding the arguments, and I don't place blame on them any more than they should on me. Clearly, this is the fault, if you want to use that term, that word, of our inability as thinking, self-aware, conscious organisms to accurately replicate the content of our own mind and produce it for the sake of others in that identical form, such that it's understood on exactly the terms as we had wished it to be in our heads. So, I hope that's understood. That is the fundamental problem, I think, when you look for a solution to the loneliness problem, if you will. Put quite simply, our conscious content, my conscious content, is separate from yours and vice versa. We cannot relate the conscious content of our minds with any accuracy, with the degrees of accuracy we should like to other people. That means that there's always a separation, an obvious separation of consciousness between you, me, and the rest of the world. Sure, there are feelings of being understood occasionally, and we associate, and I'll be talking about that in a bit, with people with whom we have often much in common or something in common. But that is not the same thing as being able to accurately relate and convey the content of your mind, your consciousness, essentially. So in a sense, we're all separated from each other. In another sense, we're not. If you look at the big picture of living organisms, but I'm not looking at that from that perspective right now, although I acknowledge it, obviously. That consciousness cannot be related or conveyed accurately to other people, and so we're perpetually in a state of loneliness. I think this is the secondary cause, apart from just the profound sense of awareness we have, fortunate, unfortunate as it might be, as the thinking, or some of us are thinking apes, as the thinking ape, that we're aware of our forthcoming annihilation, our position in the piteously indifferent universe, but also the at least tacit acknowledgement that we are just not skilled. Sorry, I apologize. That's a terrible way of putting it. We simply are not in a position to relay and convey conscious content in a manner we really would like to. And I think that's another key source to feelings of loneliness that human beings experience, because we are cut off from the rest of the world and from our fellow human beings by separate consciousnesses with separate content that's constantly being essentially misconveyed without intention, because the process of language, essentially, that is the extrapolation of this conscious content of the mind onto reality, and the spoken word, and even more so the written word, far inferior to the spoken word in this regard, cannot be replicated in the sense. And so people innately sense that, they know that, even if they haven't engaged in long-term thought experiments on it as I have, they sense that, they know that cannot be. And I think that those primarily are the two sources of ultimate feeling, if you will, ultimate causes, causes or distal causes of loneliness. It's a biological product, as everything is for us. It's a product of the fortune or misfortune we've had in having evolved large, complex brains with deep content and heightened sense of awareness that comes from such a complex brain. The disadvantages are that the awareness of the state of the universe in relation to you, whence often religion, not always, but and a host of other things, a host of other rationalizations, and as I like to call them, paint jobs done on the universe to make it seem more accommodating, and so on and so forth. Now, on a final on this particular point, that said, the amount of mental gymnastics people do, particularly in the modern era, to avoid broaching the topic, or we simply don't acknowledge death very much, I think. I'm not particularly obsessed with death. I don't really care about it. I've been dead for most of my unlife, if you will. I'm only here now, and I'm going back to oblivion when I'm gone, where I've been for about 13.7 billion years, or thereabouts. But I think, obviously, that ties into it, that something people don't want to acknowledge, and something which sort of puts a bit of futility in the whole search for the partner or what have you, and some sort of semi or pseudo-permanent solution or remedy to the feeling of loneliness, is that living long enough, each of us is going to lose each and every person we care about. And some of us will die before these people, and some people will die before us. But if we live long enough, everyone we've ever cared about, or loved, if you want to use that term, they will die. They will pass from the world and return to oblivion, and their annihilation is as certain as your annihilation. And it seems almost that the desire to avert loneliness in the human being almost inevitably will have something to do with this as well. I mean, this is what I mean. We don't acknowledge that. So I'd like to say we all die alone, and it's true. Not only are we alone as conscious beings, alone in the sense that we cannot, as I said, relate accurately the conscious content of our minds to the extent that we should like to the world, but we also die alone simply because everyone is dropping dead in droves. Even as I make this video, tens of thousands of people are dying of various ages. A child is being born now only to die a few hours later, and some 90-year-old is dropping dead, and maybe I'll be dead tomorrow, or maybe not, and maybe you will be, or maybe not. So the whole, I mean, obviously I look at this whole problem from a pretty philosophical perspective. I mean, I'm a reflective person, so that's what I do. But these seem to be the ultimate sources of this fear of loneliness in the human being, in the human ape. Now, of course, in response to questions such as, are you going to get lonely when you get older? I mean, obviously, most people are neither willing nor in a position to listen to me ramble on about, like, fortunate as I am, like you are, about this topic. I can't just simply say, well, blah, 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 I'm not going to repeat what I've just said. They're not going to, so I usually just give a quick answer and say no. I think that's usually sufficient. So we're looking, those are sort of distal or ultimate causes. Now, on a more mundane level, we can look at the group dynamic between the sexes. Now, we all know, and we've all come to realize and understand that the human female has an in-group preference, an automatic in-group preference. She has a biological preference for herself and those like her. Essentially, women, especially when it comes to friendship, have no criteria whatsoever on the whole, other than that they share genitalia. Now, this is related to the problem of so-called male desire for unfreedom. I'll explain how. Look at the difference between male friendship and female friendship. Now, male friendship is I would argue, a far more complex process. Quite frankly, very few of us make friends with people that we deem to be nether apes, as I like to call them. I certainly don't make friends, at least consciously, with nether apes if I can avoid it. Male friendships are established on the criteria often of common ground, discussion, and ideas. Ideas unite men. There needs to be external content. It's not enough that we both share the genitalia. With women, however, as I like to refer to them as the Borg, and within the Borg consensus, it's the Borg consensus. The fact that you are a member of the Borg is sufficient. And mind you, that's why the analogy is just so hair-splittingly accurate sometimes. Diversity of opinion is highly rare. I do believe women naturally tend to be naturally more collectivist, to use some person's favorite word, than men do. Men usually have rigorous criteria that they adhere to and follow through with when it comes to friendship, that women simply don't. I mean, it's enough that you have a vagina and breasts mostly, and you look a certain way, I suppose, since women are very big on their own looks amongst each other. Men don't usually have that, ever. We have friendships based on common ground, ideas, the desire to understand, things of that nature. Sometimes common goals. These, generally speaking, I'm not going to make an absolute statement that never happens, but these are, generally speaking, foreign concepts and foreign tenets for the basis of a female friendship. Like I said, the female friendship is based primarily on, well, just you're a female, I'm a female, let's get along. I mean, that's all that's required. And there's also, within the Borg consensus, very little dissent. So it doesn't matter whether a statement of one particular female in a friendship is fatuous or not. Usually within the board consensus, someone just simply agrees with the statement, and that's sufficient, and that's fine. Men like discussing things. We like discussing things. We like talking about things. Essentially, men vet themselves for, we vet each other for, I guess, worthiness of friendship or not. And I think that's obviously a good thing, because personally, I don't want to be friends with a nether ape. I have no interest in being friends with nether apes. It's not the case with women. However, so in a way, it's a good thing. But the negative of this, or the downside, if you will, is something that women have as I would possibly an advantage in this regard over men. It's not that women don't get lonely. In fact, as I'll explain, women become far lonely. They don't deal with it nearly as well as men. I think it's in large measure due to our past evolution. But women aren't really alone very often. They always have someone around, be it some male admirer, their fellow Borg members, whatever it might be. Recollecting past memories and past relationships, and this is I'm someone who's just spent most of his adult life meandering about the world alone. In the cosmic sense, but also in the real sense. Despite having a fair share of relationships, and so this is nothing. Even as I make this video, I'm alone. I'm sitting in my flat and I'm alone. This is just nothing to me. But the level of panic you see sometimes, and at least in my past relationships, with women who spend 2 weeks by themselves. They start freaking out. It's something that's just a daily routine for me. So, on the one hand, women are never alone, but when they are, they simply can't deal with it. But as I said, they're never alone. That the Borg consensus and the fact that our civilization tends to be primarily gynocentric in its ends, and that of course will result in a creature, the human female, that is rarely alone. Well, the human male creature, on the other hand, whether he wants to or not, in the conventional sense, like I said, I'm talking about the more proximate sense right now, is inevitably going to be more alone than the human female, for the simple reason that we don't have an in-group preference. We vet each other for the worthiness of the title of friend. All good things in theory, but with consequences. Men, quite frankly, we're alone in the world, in the proximate sense, as well as the ultimate sense. Women don't have this problem. So therein lies another key element to understanding the so-called the desire for unfreedom, so-called desire for unfreedom. Women simply can't deal with being alone, but they're almost never alone, and men can kind of deal with it, but they are absolutely, most men, desperate to remedy this. They will jump through hoops, as you know, to remedy this. Men, and this is something that's been around probably for at least tens of thousands of years. It's in the nature of the human male. This is how we evolved, to sort of be lone wolves, but reluctantly so, most of us at least. And that, it seems to me, far more so than some desire for unfreedom. As I said, men shackled to within the bonds of wedded unbliss, they still like doing things they like to do. It's just that they'd rather not be alone. Now, as I said, this whole vetting process, which I described, of fellow male friends, is quite interesting, because those same criteria that those men apply to their male friends, that are used as I guess tools of analysis to see whether or not someone is worthy of a friendship, they're not applied to the woman. A woman simply needs to be a female with the appropriate genitalia and what have you. That's enough. So yeah, a living human female organism is enough. The criteria are thrown out the window. That's enough to remedy loneliness. So there's obviously some element of sexual attraction. The male mother need which has been described at length, is certainly there as well. So that's all added to that. And then, of course, you just throw out the criteria that you would normally apply to most of your friends. You just say, well, she's a female, she's pretty, blah, 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 that's enough. And I've seen this time and again. Now, I'm going to post, you can see, you'll read it for yourself. This is a comment that was made some months ago from our favorite person, High Lord Inquisitor E's blog. I mean, it's comedic. It's essentially what it is. Some guy who, quote unquote, used to like me, as you can see, who then found his first girlfriend, and this is a literal, by the way, Barbarossa, quoting Barbarossa, one blowjob away. Yeah, this is what happens. I think this is also why, as I said, this is the loneliness factor. Men, they're just terrified of it. I mean, they live it every day. I mean, we live it every day in the proximate sense, although I live, I think, in a more ultimate sense, to be honest. It really bothers me that I can't relate my conscious content very well, and that I'll never be able to, and that no one can. But that's neither here nor there. In the proximate sense, we're constantly alone, and yet we're terrified of it, maybe because we're constantly alone. Women are terrified of it too, if only because they never experience it. When they do experience it, it's even more terrifying, but they rarely experience it. So men will do anything to ward that off. I mean, this is the phenomenon of, if you will, the player who eventually settles down, because being a player doesn't remedy, in the sense, that feeling of eternal loneliness that most men have. It's also why, ultimately, as I've said before, it's a losing battle. And I don't think most men will change. I stand by that. Most men won't change. Not only because of the autopilot function I described at length in a video that we all have, but also for the simple reason of what I've been talking about here, loneliness. There's this profound sense of loneliness that a male has in contrast to a female. We have no Borg consensus. We're not part of the Borg. We are, I suppose, entities to be assimilated. And even once, the difference, though, and this is where the analogy is a bit lacking, is that even though we men might be assimilated into the Borg consensus, they never become part of it, right? So that's where the analogy kind of falls apart. I suppose you become a servant state under the yoke of the Borg in this case. But rest assured, this has to be the primary factor. I mean, then you have the breeding and all that as well. People's obsession with sex and breeding. It actually disgusts me sometimes. And I'll be making a video about this, or I'm in the process of, which I talk about why human beings esteem so highly simply breeding. It's incredible. Well, why is kind of obvious, but that's the topic for this other video, among other things. But yeah, so this loneliness factor in the distal cosmic sense, but also in the more proximate sense, is clearly the driving factor. I mean, men would rather just have something around them, some sort of living, breathing female Homo sapiens organism, than not having one. But what's interesting to me in this equation is the fact that it matters not to him. It seems, at least, it matters not to him that she really doesn't. I mean, she really doesn't care about who he is as a person. And I've mentioned this before. I mean, women view men primarily as means towards an end, serve some purpose. The different varieties of hypergamy and so on and so forth. That we don't have actual human content to most women. And it's what you'll see. What you'll see is these men in general, just willing to settle for unfreedom, for simulation of interest. Well, let me put it this way. Couple of days, it was last week, I was having a conversation with a friend that I haven't seen in a long time, but we stay in touch via Skype. And I gotta say, he spent so much time trying to understand me. I appreciate it. Whether it's warranted or not is an entirely different question. and I'm quoting him. This is not my own personal opinion of myself. He, quote, I'm the most difficult person he knows to understand. Well, okay, maybe that might be the case. But I mean, the lengths he's gone to try to understand my person for no other reason than the male. Well, A, he cares about me, he's my friend, but also B, I think men, we really want to understand the world, and our friends being part of the world, we want to understand them as well. There's an element of that that once again females don't have. Females just, well, you have a vagina, okay, that's fine, and that's something that you almost certainly most of the time missing in these. I'm going to remedy my loneliness by just having female X by my side. But this seems to be ultimately to me the things I've been describing, the source of loneliness, if you will. It's not a desire for unfreedom. I don't think men enjoy the unfreedom. It's that it's preferable to the feeling of loneliness that they're constantly bombarded with. This is why men en masse won't change. I mean, men need to have that emptiness, if you will, remedied. But as I said in the beginning, the emptiness stems from a state of heightened conscious awareness and the inability to reproduce conscious content accurately. That is, we can't really relate to people on the deepest level. At the end of the day, that's really what it means. That you can't remedy this. Never mind the fact that we're all going to die, and everyone you care about is going to die too. People don't like hearing that either. So there are all these other factors as well, but at least temporarily, men seek to avert the loneliness factor by those means. Yeah. So anyway, I probably could say more about that, but I think I'll leave it at that. I am working slowly but surely on a much longer video that will be scripted, that will probably be to many of you quite boring, because I'm going to be going through a lot of evolutionary history in detail, or maybe it won't be boring, but anyway, so yeah, we'll get there when we get there with that video. Until then, may the gods watch over